In the Middle Ages, giving birth was dangerous even on a warm day. In winter, it turned into something much closer to a fight for life. The cold was everywhere. It sat in the walls, in the floors, and the breath hanging in the air. Fuel was limited, rooms were drafty, and women reached labor already tired and worn down. Every winter birth was a question mark. Nobody knew if the mother would still be alive a week later. People understood, in their own way, that the room could help save or take a life. They did not care much if it was clean by our standards. What mattered most was whether it could hold warmth. Big halls with high ceilings were avoided because heat rushed upward and stayed out of reach. Instead, the family chose the smallest room they had, usually a sleeping space close to the hearth. That tiny, crowded room became the center of the world for a while. Windows were not left open to air things out. They were shut tight with shutters, cloth, or wooden boards to keep the wind out. Any crack that let in a draft was seen as a real danger. Curtains were pulled not only so the woman could have privacy, but so that whatever heat there was would stay wrapped around her. In poor homes, people pushed furniture closer together to make the space smaller and easier to warm. The floor mattered, too. Bare stone and packed earth gave off cold like a slow, steady breath. So families laid down straw, old rugs, or layers of cloth under the birthing area. They tried to lift the woman up from the ground even a little, knowing that the chill from below could creep into her bones during a long labor. None of this was about comfort the way we think of it. It was about controlling temperature as much as possible with almost nothing. Winter made every weakness worse. Many women reached the last months of pregnancy after eating poor food for weeks, sometimes months. Harvests were over. Fresh fruits and vegetables were scarce. Bodies were thinner, paler, and more easily exhausted. Their blood was weaker. By the time labor started, a lot of women were underfed and already cold. When the air was freezing, the body had to work harder just to stay warm. That meant it had less strength left for labor itself. Cold slowed blood flow and made muscles stiff and less responsive. Contractions could become weaker, labor stretched out longer, and every extra hour meant more danger. Infections were also a constant threat. The cold did not kill germs. It simply made the body less able to fight them. Cuts and tears healed slowly in that temperature. Bleeding was harder to control when blood vessels reacted to the cold and the body was in shock. Fever after birth was especially deadly in winter. A woman with infection needed to sweat and release heat, but the cold air kept stealing warmth from her at the same time. Her body had to do two impossible things at once. Recovery that might have taken days in summer could drag out for weeks in winter. Damp walls, icy floors, and thin bedding meant the woman could never really get warm. Many did not die while giving birth. They died later when fatigue, blood loss, infection, and cold finally overwhelmed them. Fire, when it was available, became almost like another person in the room. Fuel was precious, so families were careful with it all winter. But once a woman went into labor, the rules changed. The fire near her took priority over everything else. Meals could be late. Other rooms could be left cold. The hearth closest to the birthing bed had to burn as steadily as possible, sometimes through day and night. That steady heat did more than make the room feel nicer. It kept the woman's muscles from stiffening, helped stop endless shivering that drained her strength, and lowered the chance that she would slip into dangerous shock after the baby was born. A cold body bled more and recovered more slowly. Midwives didn't talk about blood pressure or circulation, but they knew from long experience that a dying fire meant rising risk. Rich households sometimes stored extra firewood or charcoal just for the time of birth. Poor families did not always have such reserves, so neighbors might bring branches, kindling, or a few pieces of wood, understanding that warmth could be the difference between life and death. At night, ashes were banked carefully so the coals would survive until morning. No one wanted to waste time and energy trying to start a new fire while a woman was in trouble. The same fire heated water for washing hands and cloths and warming the newborn. The heat spread from the hearth into the room, and from the room into the bodies inside it. In winter, fire was never just a comfort. It was a silent helper in every birth. Cloth did what even fire could not always do. Without stoves or radiators, fabric became the main armor against the cold. Medieval women used layers of wool and linen, old garments, and anything that could hold warmth. Wool was especially valuable because it stayed warm even when damp, which made it perfect for winter births where sweat, blood, and spilled water were everywhere. The woman in labor was wrapped tightly. Helpers added or removed layers depending on how she looked and how she felt. Only the parts of her body that the midwife needed to reach were uncovered. Everything else stayed covered to trap heat. Linen sheets, washed and used again and again, did double duty as bedding and bandages. Cleanliness was important, but warmth and availability came first. Blankets were shared among the women in the room. When they leaned close to support the mother, their body heat gathered under the cloth and created a small warm circle inside the larger cold space. In poor households, people collected every scrap they owned: old cloaks, worn-out tunics, even torn sacks to line the birthing area. After the baby arrived, the mother often stayed wrapped for days. Sudden cold was believed to cause sickness, and experience had proved this true many times. At the center of this scene stood the midwife. In winter especially, she was not just someone who helped deliver a baby. She was the person who decided how to guard life in a room where everything worked against it. She had no metal instruments or formal schooling, but she carried years of memory. She knew how close the mother could sit to the fire without getting faint. She knew when to unwrap and when to cover again. She could tell by the color of the woman's skin and the look in her eyes when warmth needed to be increased. Midwives guided the pace of labor. They urged the mother to move when she grew too still and stiff, to change position when the cold made her muscles lock. They let her rest when she was shaking with fatigue. They understood that lingering too long in that cold air could drain both mother and child beyond repair. So they used everything they knew: hand pressure, changing posture, gentle commands, and reassurance to try to shorten labor when they could. Their knowledge was rarely written down. It passed from one woman to another, from older midwife to younger helper, gathered slowly from birth after birth. A midwife who had seen many winter labors could read small signs, when shivering meant real danger, when pale lips signaled serious blood loss, when it was time to bring the fire closer or add another blanket. When mistakes could easily be fatal, this kind of practical wisdom saved lives. In many homes, the midwife was the only barrier standing between childbirth and death, especially when winter stripped away every bit of safety and comfort. Warm food was another tool people used to fight the cold inside the birthing room. Women in labor were often given hot broth, thin porridge mixed with water, and other simple liquids that went down easily. These foods gave quick energy and helped keep the body warm from within at the exact moment it was under the most stress. Cold food was avoided. People believed it weakened the stomach and slowed healing, and their experience backed that belief up. Warm drinks eased shaking, calmed the stomach, and brought strength back faster than dry or heavy meals. After the birth, food became even more important. Blood had been lost. Muscles were exhausted. The room was still cold. Broths made from bones, herbs, or grains were served over and over for days. These meals were gentle on the body, but full of what it needed to recover. In winter, food was not just food. It was medicine in a bowl. For many medieval women, whether they survived childbirth in the cold months depended not only on skillful hands and steady fires, but also on the warmth they could swallow, sip by sip. In winter, no woman was meant to give birth alone. Medieval people knew that isolation was dangerous, even if they did not use that word. When labor began, other women gathered: neighbors, relatives, older daughters. They came not just to help, but to form a shield against cold, fear, and exhaustion. Their bodies were part of the heating system. Several people breathing and moving in a small space helped raise the temperature slightly. It wasn't much, but it mattered. They took turns feeding the fire, warming cloths by the hearth, and supporting the mother's body when she needed to stand, kneel, or change position. Someone was always at her side to hold her shoulders, her hands, or her weight during a contraction. Tiredness could be deadly. A woman in labor for hours without help might simply lose the strength to continue. With others present, she could lean, rest, and be lifted when she needed to. They could wipe her face, give her warm drinks, and keep her from collapsing. The emotional warmth was just as important. Fear could tighten every muscle and make labor longer and harder. Familiar voices made a difference. Soft words, prayers spoken aloud, little stories, and calm instructions helped keep panic under control. These women had usually gone through childbirth themselves. They shared what they had felt and survived, and in doing so they helped the laboring woman believe she might survive, too. A woman who had to face childbirth alone in winter was in far more danger. She would battle cold, blood loss, and fear without extra hands or extra warmth. Medieval people understood this, even if they couldn't explain it in medical language. Community was survival knowledge. The presence of other women turned childbirth from a lonely battle into a shared human effort against the season. For the baby, winter was just as dangerous. The first breath the child took was drawn into lungs filled with freezing air. Fragile skin was suddenly exposed to a room that could still feel icy even with a strong fire burning. The first few minutes were critical. Helpers moved quickly. They wrapped the newborn in warm cloth or wool almost as soon as it emerged, sometimes even before the placenta was delivered. They did not leave the baby lying bare on cold sheets. Washing was postponed or done very quickly with water warmed by the fire. The infant was then held close against the mother's chest or another woman's body to use their heat as a shield. Crying, though worrying to listen to, was taken as a good sign. It showed that there was breath and energy. Everyone in the room knew how fast the cold could claim a new life. A newborn left unwrapped for even a short time might grow weak and quiet, not from peace, but from losing strength. So winter survival for a baby began not with feeding, but with heat. The first hug, the first small blanket, and the shared warmth of skin-to-skin contact decided whether the baby lived long enough to nurse, sleep, and grow. In that dim room, faith also played its part. For medieval women, childbirth, winter, and danger were tied closely to prayer. When the pain grew worse and fear rose in their throats, they turned to familiar words and names. Many whispered to saints known for protecting mothers, especially St. Margaret, calling for help that medicine could not give. These prayers were not just formal words from a book. They were a way to hold steady in the middle of pain and uncertainty. Rituals helped shape the chaos into something that made sense. A small cross, a rosary, or another holy object might lie near the bed. Blessings could be spoken at different points in the labor, turning each stage into something marked and witnessed. Fear had a physical effect. It tightened limbs, stiffened muscles, and slowed everything down. Belief, whether fully understood or not, had the opposite effect. It loosened tension, slowed breathing, and brought focus back to the work of giving birth. In a world with little medical certainty, faith created a kind of order, even when outcomes were unclear. For the women gathered, shared belief, strength, and courage. Even when they suspected the worst might happen, ritual gave their effort meaning. It told them that what was happening in that cold room was part of a larger story. In the middle of snow and darkness, faith became another kind of warmth, one that lit the mind when the body was failing. To give birth in winter during the Middle Ages demanded more than physical strength. It required a kind of resilience shaped slowly over time, built from practical experience, community habits, and quiet courage. These women did not have hospitals, clean wards, or trained doctors. What they had instead was a careful way of guarding warmth, a body of knowledge passed from woman to woman, and a circle of support gathered at the hardest moment of life. They learned how to choose the warmest room, how to place the bed, how to watch the fire, how many blankets to use, which foods to offer, and when. They knew that a sudden chill could undo days of healing, that a dying fire could endanger both mother and child, that a lonely birth was far more likely to end badly. Many medieval women faced cold rooms, scarce fuel, thin clothing, and constant risk. Yet they met these conditions with steady, quiet determination. When a birth went well, it was not just luck, it was the result of many small, careful actions. A hearth fed through the night, cloths heated and layered, broth warmed again and again, hands that did not leave the mother, voices that did not let fear take over. History rarely gives us their names. Their stories are almost never written down. but the lives that came after them, the children, grandchildren, and whole communities existed because those women endured what most of us could hardly imagine. In deep winter, with almost nothing, they still found ways to protect life using warmth, shared effort, and human care.